Thank you for the invitation, and thank all of you for staying to the bitter end. Hopefully I'll make it interesting. I wanted to talk to some extent about this paper. I found it really interesting. You can't really see the author list, but these are the authors' affiliations. It's just about every big pharma and every major competent authority. They talked about the clinical trial process, and they do have this caveat that it's not the FDA and the EMA that's speaking, it's actually individuals, but so I'll pass that caveat on. But what they showed was this diagram, which I found a real kind of light bulb going off moment. What they speak about here is the time in years and the number of patients exposed to the therapy on the y-axis. And we've all been involved over the last day talking about this period of time. So there's phase 1, 2, 3 trials, and then there's this thing that they call in the paper the magic moment, when they get the marketing license, and then there's this huge increase in numbers of patients, and then a slow tail off as this therapy becomes obsolete and replaced by others. So what we're faced with is this valley of death here for SMEs. It's the cost of getting to this magic moment stage. But one of the things also that's absolutely critical is that we have in our field limited shots at the successful treatment protocol. And Dolores spoke earlier about trials that had failed in venous stasis ulcers, and I'd been involved in one of those. And I think what we did was the wrong protocol. So you have really 3 shots at getting the protocol right. As you all know, when you do this, you have this probably a clinical development board made of key opinion leaders who come up with their best guess of what the protocol will be. And you pump millions, tens of millions into that guess. But also, if you have a breakthrough therapy, patient access is limited. These patients over here have to wait and hopefully survive until this magic moment's reached. So it's not helping the SMEs, it's not helping the patients. But one aspect which I really wasn't aware of from the big pharma's point of view is that they see new events here, because they very tightly have inclusion-exclusion criteria of the patients during these stages to try and get them the magic moment as quick as possible, and then all of a sudden it's exposed to everybody. And there are people who would have been excluded from the trials now treated. And they see new events, adverse events, lawsuits, lots of issues. So it's not even helping them. And 2 quotes from the paper was that the current pathway is ill-suited, and that the cost of medicine is increasing, and it's unsustainable within the current system. So what they were speaking about is this potential system in which you have an initial license. So somewhere in the trial process, you get an initial license. You have patients here who are both in the trial and are being treated and reimbursed. One of the things, again, another magic moment for me was that reading the regulations, this already exists, really, for unmet medical needs in a number of ways. With the MHRA, there's specials. With the EMA, there's hospital exemptions, conditional approvals in exceptional circumstances. With the FDA, there's expanded access and humanitarian device exemptions. There are already many, many ways in which you can actually treat patients pre-license, pre-full license, if you're working on an unmet medical need. And pushing this forward, you could actually start treating patients with some phase 2 efficacy. And this is the big if, you can convince people to pay for these treatments, you're getting health economic data real time, right at the stage where you're looking at this process. But you're also being able to optimize the treatment protocol. You're allowing clinicians not to follow a very prescribed protocol, but to do what they seem best fit for their patient. So you could see this kind of reiterative loop. And this fits in with an old slide now from the MHRA, where they talk about iterative development and saying the gradual emergence of efficacy. This is for our field. And I think this is absolutely bang on, right, of what we need to do. So what I'm calling this is progressive translation. And I see it as formed from 3 areas, 3 aspects. First one is progressive license. By focusing on unmet medical needs, and maybe orphan products, but it's unmet medical needs that's important, you allow access using the current legislative frameworks already in place to get material into patients early on, whilst you're doing the clinical trials. This is not instead of clinical trials and the licensing and the magic moment. This is a prequel to that point, because that allows progressive development, a close partnership between the contract developer and the hospital, allowing this iterative development of new treatments or new protocol for a fixed treatment. And then progressive reimbursement. Obtain early reimbursement from a variety of sources. Could be patient pays, could be could be charities, could be insurance companies. But you increase that, and that could provide finances as well as providing critical marketing information about health economics. And what we're doing at Intercytex is we're using Vivelta ICX-RI as an exemplar of this system. We're developing collaborations, and we're utilizing specials in parallel with clinical trial routes, and we're already obtaining reimbursements. So this is the product. You've probably all seen it before. It's a solution of allergenic human dermal fibroblasts, which is injectable through a narrow gauge needle, has at the moment an 11-day shelf life at 4 to 8. And we're looking at it in 2 indications, 2 medical indications. One, epidermolysis bullosa, which is a mutation of type 7 collagen here, so the patient's skin is very fragile, blisters very easily. And what we're doing, this was directed by a clinician at King's College who injected the cells. There's quite a few groups, Organogenesis being one of them, that have looked at topical treatment of cells on these EB lesions. Problem is that, according to the clinician, is that there's lots of infection in these ulcers, and putting a media-soaked device on this causes a lot of infection. So what he wanted to do was inject the cells, hide them really from the bacteria. This is the worst ulcer I've ever seen. This is an entire patient's back. So this is her shoulder blades up here, her hips down here. This covers her entire back, and she's had this for 14 years. I just can't imagine the quality of life of this. This is something she wrote to assist us for getting reimbursement, and we injected 20 mils of fibroblasts around the margins of this ulcer, and you can see it's not healed, but it's healing, and she's about to have another round of treatment. One of the things she also said in this affidavit was that she screamed like a banshee when it was injected. It's very sensitive skin, and injecting repeatedly. So this was about 100 injections. It just caused a lot of pain for her. We recently, it wasn't really completed, we stopped a study in EB. We wanted to get 25 patients. We were able to get 11. It's a rare disease. These are really sick patients, and it was very difficult to enroll them. We screened 354 patients, got 11. This is kind of the bottom line, was that these erosions were increasing in size during the 1-month runoff, and then injecting alone helped the ulcer. We think that was causing some local inflammatory response, which was causing some wound healing, but injecting the cells increased it much more. What we found was that effect kind of tailed off after a couple of weeks. So again, we did a wrong protocol. We should have done repeated injections. 2 things from a paper in publication at the moment is that the optimal dose of fibroblasts, we don't know what that is. We injected around the margin of the ulcer. We don't know if that's the right place. Maybe in the ulcer will be better. And the frequency of treatment, we need to do repeated treatments, as well as the best delivery modalities. And clinical utility could be further extended, providing a less painful method of injecting the cells could be achieved. So what we're doing is, whilst we develop that data to understand better the treatment modality, we're following this progressive translation route. So what we've already got, we've got orphan designation in the EU and US. We've completed this phase 2 clinical trial, as I mentioned. We have a specials license now for our manufacturing facility, so we can manufacture this under the specials legislation. We're doing progressive development in that we're improving the shelf life and logistics so that we want to have constant pharmacy supply of material so that then clinicians can call it down using the specials legislation when they need. And as Keith mentioned this morning, we're working with a cell therapy catapult to produce a less painful injection system. And we're working with MIMIT, which is based at Manchester University, to look at the feasibility of using hollow microneedles, and we could combine these two streams and develop a less painful injection system. And we're looking at progressive reimbursement. We already have NHS reimbursement to treat the first patients, which is, it means the NHS are paying us to manufacture product to treat patients based on phase 2. So I don't think this idea of phase 1, 2, 3, then go to the health insurance agencies, convince them to pay for the product. I think that can be circumvented whilst you're reaching this magic moment. And we're also working with charities to examine reimbursement possibilities. In order to do this, we decided we needed a much closer interaction with hospitals than the usual relationship that industry has with hospitals. And we've developed a partnership with University Hospital of South Manchester in order to accelerate these studies. It just looks like a regular hospital, and I find it very forward thinking. I've worked with an awful lot of hospitals around the world, and these are the most imaginative ones I've seen. They're also no slouches because it leads the UK in clinical trial recruitment. They recruited more patients in 2011-12 than any other PCT. So this one hospital recruited over 20,000 patients into clinical studies, which I think is no mean achievement. They also have a burn service, a burns unit there, which we are working with very closely because our second indication are scar contractures. You've probably seen this. We've had this now many years ago. What's interesting is this contracture has not returned. It was treated several years ago now, 15 years after the burn, injected fibroblasts into this. It resolved itself and hasn't returned. This was another patient treated. She had contractures around her neck, and she's a much increased mobility, able to raise her neck much more. This was one other patient. She'd had a dog bite in the side of her face. She couldn't open her mouth fully. One series of injections of the fibroblasts around this, and then she can open her mouth fully, and this is what she wrote. We didn't even ask her. She just emailed us one day to say it's really helped, and it hasn't come back, and it's over 3 years old since treatment now. So again, to use this progressive translation, it's the same product, so some of these things are the same in that we're applying for orphan designation for this indication. We're looking for the funds to do a phase 2 clinical trial, looking for government funds from various sources to do clinical trial, the phase 2. We have this specials license so we can start treating patients now. We're improving the logistics, and we're working on this, as I mentioned before, this reduced pain injection system. And we're working with the UHS EM Burn Centre to determine the best treatment pathways under this specials legislation. And we've looked at possible routes from the NHS through specialised services in which they could reimburse product. So burn surgeons already have pots of money in which they can reimburse products for novel products to try to treat burn patients. And again, we're working with charities. So what we've decided to do, in order partly to reduce our burns and partly because I think it's really an interesting way to develop regenerative medicine products, is we have created this cell to therapy service in which we are providing this to third parties. We already have current clients. We are based currently in the core technology facility of Manchester University. We relaunched in 2011 after nearly disappearing in 2008-9 in the credit crunch. We moved to the core technology facility. We took over their GMP manufacturing facility, and we've obtained their IMP license for them and a special license just this year. We're using this in clinical trials, and we have a service side. and we are already cash neutral. So we don't need to raise investment funds, which is great. It means we can actually grow as a business. We're really small, but we are perfectly formed, and we have an awful lot of experience at doing this. So what we have is experience at CTAs and INDs. We've done IMPs and specials manufacturing. We've done GMP manufacturing for years and years. And we've run, designed, and monitored our own clinical trials. So we can do everything, or we have done everything, and we are doing everything for our own products. As an example, because some people are talking about the size of clinical trials and clinical manufacturing, this is just one trial we used to do. Now, admittedly, this is not in the facility we're in at the moment, but it's the same size. The facility we're in now is the same size as it was when we did this study. So this was an allogeneic fibroblast fibrin gel in a phase 3 clinical study. It didn't reach its primary endpoint because we rushed it, in my opinion anyway. We shipped product to US, Canada, Poland, and around many sites in the UK. We had 62 clinical sites recruited. 800 subjects were screened, 400 subjects were enrolled. We produced 350 batches of this fibroblast fibrin gel over 4 years. 11,000 units were manufactured, 10,000 units were shipped in 2,000 separate shipments. And we produced all this from 2 really small GMP clean rooms. I think this is one of the biggest advantages of our field, is that we don't need to have 50, 60 million pounds manufacturing facilities. You can produce an awful lot of product in a relatively small amount of space. Were we selling this, we were looking at the selling price of around about $1,000. So that would have been $10 million worth of product from 2 clean rooms, way smaller than this room. What's also interesting with UHSM, I said they're very forward-thinking. They're developing, in conjunction with Manchester City Council, the UHS EM Eddie Park. And I've been involved in some of this kind of strategic planning of it, because when they first showed it to me, I thought, oh, here we go, just another science park. But I think this one has the potential to be very different, because it's surrounding the hospital. So instead of usual science park and incubators in which it's a university or something like GSK or AstraZeneca in which the ideas are moving into the park, this is a hospital. So ideas will be moving out, but also, more importantly, ideas can move in. You know, there's access to these 20,000 patients a year recruitment in a clinical study. What's more important, I think, is its location. It's here, and this is Manchester Airport. And it is literally, I have driven it, it takes 5 minutes to go from the Medi Park to the cargo loading bays of Manchester Airport. And that ships anywhere. So you're 5 minutes away from a logistic hub. There's also a huge motorway network. This motorway, there's a bridge goes over this motorway system. And this dotted line is where the high-speed 2 train will go. And there'll be a station just here that serves Manchester Airport. Manchester Airport themselves are also very forward-thinking, in which they're just building an airport city, they call it here, which is a series of hotels and manufacturing facilities. So the manufacturing facilities can access the logistic hub here, but also a series of hotels. So you can imagine a system whereby either product could be shipped out or patients could be shipped in. So an inward moving kind of medical tourism. So I think logistically it has amazing advantages, and it really has the backing of the Manchester City Council. It's in the Manchester Enterprise Zone, which means it has tax advantages and planning advantages. So it's apparently easier to get planning permission for building in this space. And this Medi Park is 70 acres. So it's going to have a lot of space. Not that many places in the UK have that amount of space for manufacturing. So in conclusion, I think the current standard pathway to market is ill-suited to enable the timely, well-informed patient access. That's a quote from that paper. And that regenerative medicines are well-suited to this streamlined clinical development through progressive translation and this gradual emergence of efficacy. But such a strategy requires a close and continual contact and collaboration with health services, not unlike, I think, what we've been doing at the moment, where we just see the hospital as a potential either supplier of patients pre the magic moment and a customer post the magic moment. And I think Manchester is strategically and geographically well suited as a site to develop this progressive translation system. Thank you.